All right, so we are live. All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Nervous System Training Podcast. I have a special guest again, Dr. Lyneil, author of The Strong Angle Way, nervous system training philosopher extraordinaire. He's someone that I've been learning from for a really long time and really like his perspective on training. And he's authored a book that I'm reading right now called The Strong Angle Way, which is a really cool book. It's definitely if you're an up and coming trainer, you want to learn more knowledge. And also, yeah, here you go. And also, I really love how you kind of take influence of like psychology and personal identity and how that attaches to how you approach training or how you approach your own athleticism, which I really appreciate. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about his philosophy of the strong angle, which I'm pretty excited to get into. And we may take deeper dives into some more early stuff that maybe he has some insight on with like Troy Polamalu and Marv Marinovich, and kind of like give us a little bit more insight on what limited information there is in the public domain. So, Dr. Lyneil, thanks for jumping on. And yeah, so why don't you tell me a little bit more about this philosophy of the strong angle? We tapped into it a lot on our previous episode, so let's kind of make a continuation on this. Let me ask you this. When you were developing this philosophy of the strong angle, what sort of things did you kind of have to ask yourself to kind of come to these to land into these areas to try to help language the journey of understanding physiology and training of the human body?
Yeah, it was neat when we were just off air. We have such a similar background, but yet different. Like you were talking about, it's like similar journeys, and you can almost see like your future mind as you're reading the book, like kind of where I'm at with it right now. You can see how it connects to that, right? And so a lot of the times when I'm presenting this to people, especially if they have any background in this, I'm usually giving them some level of maybe translation or just understanding and connecting some of the dots. Well, that was what happened to me early on in my career. I went through the same thing, wrestling background, martial arts background, playing multiple different sports, and things just never added up. Really, and never connected. And there was never really a central theme. It was just all these modalities and methodologies that were, circling around that you as the practitioner have to become like a black belt ninja to be able to go, okay, well, what do they mean over here? And what do they mean over here? But yet in physical therapy, we always had these centralized themes that kind of held everything together. Like in biomechanics, you always have to have proximal stability before we're going to address distal mobility. It's just like a one of those kind of cliche things that we talk about all the time over and over again, right? And so I had been working with this system, right? We talked about it last time. I was heavy into neuro. I worked in a traumatic brain injury unit. I did EMG and nerve conduction velocity testing, and I was super into the nervous system. And I was looking for a way to try to incorporate my understanding of how the nervous system worked in return to sports rehab versus looking at what we do in the typical strength and conditioning, right? And so again, I had this amazing mentor at the University of Cincinnati, and basically, he was very heavy neuromuscular, right? And then all of a sudden, I would have to throw people into these weightlifting programs, basically in the traditional strength and conditioning, where now in the language that I would use, if you really understand how weightlifting works, we're always overloading the weak angle, right? And basically, it creates a really heavy strain on your physiology, but functionally, we operate in the strongest angles, especially when it comes to rotation. And so basically, there was a huge paradigm difference between what we were doing when it came to how are we going to exercise in kind of what I would call the intervention world versus how the human body expresses, and then trying to bring those things together and go, okay, well, we want to be the most functional we can in the intervention world, right? But we're overloading the weak angle. And then I'm going to jump into functional training, if you want to call it that, or in functional neuromuscular conditioning and PNF and all these things that we talked about last time. And particularly in physical therapy, we focus more on accommodating resistance, right? And so accommodating resistance basically means that you're taking pressure off and load off of the weak angle so you can put it onto the stronger angle, which is just a basic premise of safety, right? Well, why is that? Well, because we're the most unstable in the weakest in the weak angle, right? So if I have somebody that's already injured and they have a weakness that's there inherently because of this injury, well, if I push them into their weaker angle, they basically can't switch directions well enough. If they get unstable, they're going to be more likely to be hurt or just to create more of an inflammation process that we don't want, right? At some point, you got to start reintroducing weak angle things back in because it's a part of life. But at the same time, in physical therapy, we're so concentrated on keeping people in the strongest angles, right? Because they're the safest. And I'll come back to that. So there, Mike Maddox, right, is the inventor of the miracle isokinetic machine that Marv used, and we could talk about that more. And fortunately, at some point, he came to me when I was working as a PT, using all of his equipment and Marv's stuff, and we created this amazing mentorship, friendship, business partnership, right? And he has all of these weird kind of like, yeah, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but like the way that he says stuff, like instead of saying jumping jacks, he'll say side straddle hops, right? And it's like if you don't really know what he means, you don't understand exactly what he means, right?
Hmm.
And so if you don't know that he's saying jumping jacks, you think maybe he's talking about lateral Heisman type of movements or something, side straddle hops, right? But he's actually just talking about jumping jacks. But he's 82 years old, right? And so you have to remember that he's coming from a different era than we are, right? And he would constantly say to me, well, it's all about the strong angle, right? Everything functionally happens in the strong angle. It happens in the strong angle. And I heard him saying it over and over again. But again, hodgepodge of different conversations and like never really hammering down on one central concept. And then I started realizing, well, again, what I was just saying about accommodating resistance, and basically, I was like, well, Quintin, I can't really come to you and be like, hey, a tough MMA guy, you want to try some accommodating resistance, right? And you're like, what is that? I don't want to do that, right? That's not going to be very marketable type of scenario, right?
Yeah.
Most people are going to look, what are you trying to accommodate me? What are you doing, right? And then one day it hit me, and I was like, oh no, it's the strong angle. That's what it's about, right? And what really happened was whenever you accommodate your own body for the weak angle, you basically prepare to overcome the weak angle. And with that, you have to position your body in a different way than you do when you're more functional, when you run and jump, for example, right? In a typical squatting pattern, people turn their feet out wide, they spread them out. A lot of times, even though you're not supposed to, you anteriorly tilt the pelvis, right? You're starting to arch your lower back. You're actually putting yourself in a disconnected pattern, but it helps you to overcome the load in the weakest angle. And so people think, okay, well, I'm winning because I keep increasing load into the weak angle, but it never ends up really transferring into the stronger angle where you don't do that pattern. Your feet are closer together, your feet are facing straight forward, they're underneath of your center of gravity, right? Your lower back doesn't arch, your pelvis doesn't tip, right? You're a little bit more upright when you, particularly when you go to run or jump or really any athletic movement. And so I had been trying to understand what Mike meant about this strong angle. Most of our interaction has been on the phone, and I've been with him in person a lot, but he's done a lot of coaching and mentoring me with on the phone. I literally talk to him every day. And this was all coming to me again, his ability to communicate and translate. Really, I've been the translator of what he designed these machines for and how it relates back to the common language that we've been learning in exercise science and kinesiology and strength and conditioning. He uses a different language, right? So it's been hard to say, okay, well, what he means is this, right? And so there I am, I'm on his isokinetic machine, and he keeps saying that you got to have perfect form in the strong angle, right? That would be basically what he would say. And I'm thinking, okay, perfect form, like a squat, right? Just like we just talked about. Your feet are a little bit wider, da 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 da. And then all of a sudden it hits me that I'm misaligning myself like I'm lifting a barbell for the weak angle. And ultimately, he's been making all of these machines that he makes to basically facilitate the strong angle,
Mm.
right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. And so pissed off at myself, right? Like I've been doing this for, almost 10 years at this point, and I've had these machines and I'm starting to become like this so-called expert type of scenario. And there I am making a huge fundamental flaw with all of this because I'm putting myself in the weak angle and I don't even know it. And so after about an hour, probably, I step back. I write about this in the book. This is one of my first aha moments. And I step back and I'm like, well, okay, if that's true, I can't be the only one making this mistake, right? We're missing the weak angle and what it does, and also misinterpreting it for what the strong angle is. And if you're doing that, there's no way that you can get the benefit from the strong angle,
Mm.
if that makes sense, because you're already putting yourself in a misalignment from the beginning. And so
Right.
then I started kind of testing it on everything. And I was having a conversation with somebody like you, super smart, knows their stuff, right? Maybe not as quite as into it as I am because I'm psycho obsessed with this stuff for just longer, even, and I got real frustrated. And this was right at the beginning. And I was trying to relate the physical side and the psychological side and the strategic side and the leadership stuff that I write about in the book. And I was fumbling around on it. And, I thought about this later. Rightfully so, this person was getting frustrated, right? And then I was getting frustrated too. And I stopped and I was like, all right, listen, one thing. Do you want to be in the strong angle or the weak angle? Pretty simple, isn't it? I was like, oh, that's it. That's the question we're not asking. We're not asking that question in the present moment, even when we're doing nervous system training. And so, if you're doing nervous system training, you really want to understand the strong angle because nervous system is all about pure conditioning, right? And Mike's whole thing from the beginning, Mike Maddox, his whole system that he had was based on repetition and volume, right? Well, repetition and volume is how you acquire skills. And we don't always think about skill acquisition and how we're conditioning the body. We just think, okay, we're going to create this stimulus and response that has an indirect transfer, and then we're going to take that and put it into the expression phase of your athletics, right? But all the while, if you're conditioning the weak angle, the next thing you know, you end up with. I was listening to one of your other podcasts. You end up with a side dominance problem where you're now all of a sudden your right hip hurts all the time, and you don't understand why that's happening, and you
Hmm.
also don't understand how to fix it. Now we're getting better of understanding why that's happening, but we still keep doing everything in the weak angle and don't realize that it's not going to actually fix the problem that we're trying to fix.
Okay. Okay.
And largely, the weak angle causes you to express your side dominance more.
Okay. Let me ask you a question because I'm a very visual guy. Like most of the things I come up with, and even my own understanding of training, I can almost like see it in my head, like what's happening beneath the skin. It's kind of like how my mind works. Like here's something weird about me. I can't memorize anything from a textbook. Like when I had to learn anatomy for like some certification stuff, but when I draw it and relabel it, I have it photographically in my head. It's like a weird thing I kind of like. So the point I'm trying to make is I'm trying to see it a little bit better in my head what you're talking about. So the weak angle, and I might be butchering this, so please forgive me, but the weak angle,
Okay.
if I were to create a visual representation of this, like let's say I'm doing an isometric hold, right? And I do that isometric hold at the lowest angle of flexion where my pelvis goes below my knee. And it's so freaking hard to create any strength from that angle. That's the weak angle you're referring to, like in a nutshell.
Correct.
Correct.
So
Okay.
basically, you can look at it. Gravity always overloads the weakest angle of a range of motion.
Right. Right.
So when we add weight, weight adds gravity,
Mhm.
basically, if you want to look at it that way, right?
Right. Right.
Where a band, for example, stretches, right? And so it accommodates for basically that range of motion where the further you get away from the weak angle, that band is stretching and the resistance is getting harder as the band stretches, right?
Hmm.
But now as we come back, the band takes tension off. And again, depending on what angle you're at in your movement or whatnot, right? This is just a simplicity way of thinking about what weights do, and what most of our exercise training does is creates a generic physiological response where our muscles have to keep recruiting harder and harder and harder to overcome this weaker angle of the motion,
Mm-hmm.
right? But again, in some sports like wrestling, you may have to go into that deep lunge type of position,
Right.
right? What it really comes down to is how do you feel? Can you switch directions?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can't switch directions like the 1 inch punch, that means that that weak angle is now disconnecting you, or at least it's leaking in your kinetic chain, right? And so the trick is if you're really in the strong angle, because it's not just a range of motion.
Okay.
The trick is can you switch directions without a compensation,
Okay.
right? So if you look at like static dynamic or uh, dynamic strength index and those type reactive strength index, those types of things. I'm trying to think of what Verkhoshansky and those guys called strength deficit. So if you're looking at, I'm going to do a vertical jump where I'm standing straight up and I drop my hips and I jump, right? Versus I'm going to squat down and I'm going to pause and hold an isometric position and then jump up, right? If you even have people try to do that, most of the time when they get to here, they can't just go straight up, right? Their head pops, their shoulders shift, their butt sticks out, right? They shift their weight because they're not finding the strong angle,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
right? Which is very
Um,
similar to the 1 inch punch, right? The 1 inch punch is where you can just go, right? And you don't have any tell. So if I'm off position, now I have to come back to that angle to be able to create that force. Does that make sense?
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm seeing it. I'm starting to see it. So, and I try not to, correct me if I'm like, I don't know if you notice this, I'm like studying you like an AI computer, like trying to like learn as much of this as possible. But I'm trying my best to keep my mind from thinking this as a right or wrong way, like left or right, red or green. And I'm trying to see like all the layers of gray into this. So if I'm understanding this correctly, is that a majority of like possible mistakes when it comes to training, or at least the current popular philosophy of training, is that they tend to push athletes to get stimulus too often in the weak angle and not often enough in the stronger angles. And most of sports expressions, like I kind of was touching on this idea a little bit, where there's like a modality that's really popular that I'm not a big fan of, but it definitely can help. Where you see athletes sit in a chair and then they'll like put their feet on the ground and then try to jump up, right? And when I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but I'm thinking like in like basketball, like very rarely do you drop into that much flexion to launch yourself up, right? There's the leverage isn't biomechanically sound. That's not really what happens in the game. You're usually at like a quarter flexion, and a lot of times your calves is doing most of the work. Loading and through the amortization phase, right? So am I kind of following where you're going with this strong angle weekend? Okay, okay, okay. I am smarter than I thought I am. I'm so proud
No,
of
that's
myself.
it.
I'm sticking with this.
Yep. Yeah, and
Okay.
then there's just so the first step. So again, I'm not trying to necessarily just plug the book, even though I probably am, right?
Plug a book. Buy the book.
So if you look at the symbol, right, and so the infinity sign, and I talk about this in the book, what it means, right, is this idea of constant change or constant optimization. And so that's not what I'm talking about right now, but I had the yin and yang symbol on here, right? And so what people miss about the yin and yang is that it's an interconnectedness, right? And so the point of it is you can't have the strong angle without the weak angle,
Right.
right? The problem is when you don't recognize which one you're actually doing,
Yes.
right? When you're not ever asking that question and you don't have a clear understanding of what it is, then you're automatically typically going to fall back to the weak angle. One of the main reasons is, and I talk about this in the book as well, is that entropy. Are you familiar with that? It's one of the laws of physics.
I've heard this word before, but please help my brain.
Yeah, so it's a principle that governs how the universe works, particularly in closed systems where everything moves kind of towards disorder and chaos. most of our science has been based upon the idea of entropy and being able to break things down into reductionist type of parts and measure them. So we've been limited by our science and the tools that we have to measure things, right? We need to
Right.
have numbers, right, to go, okay, this is measurably a change that we're seeing a significant difference type of situation, right? Whether you're talking about some big cross sectional, study of huge groups of people for prevalence of something or whatever, down to understanding what type of graft works on an ACL tear better or whatever it is, right? We're limited to the way that we do statistics and how we gather the data for that. And so another researcher had come along way back, and again, I talk about this in the book, and he coined this other term called syntropy. And syntropy is basically purpose, right? It's order. But so syntropy is the opposite of entropy. Well, I don't want to say it's necessarily opposite. It's kind of the other side of the coin, right? Where it's purpose and order. And so we don't really have a good way of measuring purpose, if that makes sense. And that's what goes into some of these things, like to talk about what is my goal when I'm doing an exercise, right? Well, am I trying to get better at doing the exercise, or am I trying to use the exercise to get better at something else?
Right. Right.
Right, and fundamentally, right, and so that's where syntropy comes in. But most of our existence of our science has been based upon entropy, based upon reductionist, breaking things down into its smaller parts and then having some number to quantify something and going, okay, well, this is why we should do this. Well, the easiest, and we don't have to go into this, but we could be on here for 2 hours probably. What is strength? Right, you ask that question,
Right.
right, and most people think, well, it's how much weight you can lift, right? And
Right.
then like Ram and Marvin, those guys will say it was how fast you can move the weight, how far can you throw a weight, right? For example, with this supercat and things like that, right? And so you have so many challenges to define strength. Well, it's like, well, strength doesn't have one definition, so it's probably not clearly defined enough, right, for us to just say the word strength and have it make any sense. But we do that, right? And so
Yes.
we leave things poorly defined. And it's like, well, how can you be well aligned if you're poorly defined,
Mm-hmm. Right.
right? And so you're obviously starting in the weak angle if you're poorly defined. Again,
Okay.
coming back to that, right? So
Yes.
now if I want to optimize my grind, I need to be clearly defined and well aligned, meaning that I'm clear as can be on what my definitions of things are, right? So then I'm also aligning that in the present moment with the future that I'm fighting for, right? And so coming back to what I was just saying, though, if you're not recognizing the strong angle and you're going to do these exercises and you already have a side dominance because you're right-handed and you've thrown a million right-hand crosses and a million right-hand high kicks in your life, right? You're just going to keep patterning that in over and over and over again,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And if you do it in the weak angle, it actually intensifies it and breaks things down even more.
Okay. Okay.
Right? And again, more importantly, it's not asking that question, right? When you start asking that question of whether you're in the strong angle or the weak angle, it changes how you see everything,
Yeah.
right? You just have to be willing to ask it. And again, I'll come back to defining it. It is, how well do you feel like you can switch directions? How is your agility? And this works mentally as well. If you feel like you're stuck, you're in the weak angle,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a misalignment, right? You're not connecting. And that's what I go through the code in the book, right? It's alignment, connection, and this is the phase that we miss, right? Connection's the phase we skip over. We go from alignment to coordination,
Right.
right? Without thinking about connection. And so then from coordination, we jump to execution, which would be your real world expression in a world of chaos,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is really, and you know this, in martial arts, we get into weak angles, but it's really your strong angles that actually break down because you're not conditioning them the way in Marv's system and whatnot, we do a better job of it, right? But in most training styles, we're conditioning in the weak angle, and then we use the strong angle when we're punching and kicking and doing the movements that we do. Right. So
Yeah.
that's what breaks down. So then what happens is at best we have to overtrain like crazy because you're basically your kinetic chain is breaking down while you're actually performing in your real world movements.
Okay.
Am I
Boy,
getting too
man.
far out there?
No, it's it's one of those things where like have you ever played a new video game or something like that and you suck the first day, you just need to sleep and get back to it, or like you're learning an instrument, kind of in that zone right now. Where I'm barely holding on to this fish, but I'm starting to see the vision that you're talking about. Now, but I
Yeah,
think about jujitsu a lot when you reference these ideas to give me more of like a visual context to understand like strong angle connection, expression, like in that order. You know what I mean?
definitely. And the first part is just again asking the question, thinking about what it means for your alignment, right? Are you in the alignment that you want to be in right now that's connecting you to the future that you're actually trying to get to? Right? Does
Mhm.
this moment of what you're doing, right? The same reason I'll go. I've been bringing Patrick Mahomes up about this, right? If he could have changed the angle of his knee, knowing that it was going to blow out in that moment, because he was all injuries happen in the weak angle.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay, so if he would have been in the strong angle, his knee wouldn't have blown out.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Okay, so if you think of GOTA, functional patterns, all of these things, right? They don't have a language for what they're talking about. It's again, it's a lot of visual stuff, right? But you'll see, these guys, they're overpronating, they're going into valgus, whatever it is biomechanically. We see sometimes one shoulder's elevated, all of this stuff. When it's like, why is that happening? It's not because you need to lift your other shoulder. It's not because you need to roll your foot to the other direction, right? It's literally because you've been consistently putting yourself in the weaker angle over and over and over again. Now, if we do that with high speed, high resistance or load and or fatigue, the risk for injury goes up and up. Well, why? Because it's harder to switch directions when you're in the weak angle,
Okay. Okay.
right?
And this,
So
yeah.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say this is kind of like now it's kind of like I'm starting to connect the dots. What Marv was trying to express, but he just didn't quite have the words, like the language to put it through. But I'm that yeah, that makes more sense how all injuries happen in the weak angle. Um, Let me ask you this.
And
Uh,
that's the trick, right? It's the trick. Having that, not having the code for it. Well, then how are you supposed to go train it? How are you supposed to go replicate it? Right? A
right.
lot of that stayed in Marv's head,
Yeah. Right.
right? So, anyways, go ahead.
Well, have you ever thought about why this even exists in human beings?
Yeah.
Like, have you ever gone back and tried to do a thought experiment? Like, why does this? Let's take it even further. Why this even shows up in all biology? Because I was looking at, I used to study a lot of animals, right, to understand. Like when I was like watching a gazelle.
I forgot you love this part because I love this part too. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we go. You know how I get going. I always got to go back to the beginning of time and bring it up again. So when I was really trying to understand like this training, like plyometrics, how it works, I was working with Nick Kirsten back in like 2016. I was watching this video footage of this little gazelle getting water, out of like a small watering hole in Africa, and a crocodile lunged to get it, and the gazelle jumped and yeah, just snapped away from the crocodile and didn't get captured by it. And I remember thinking like, that gazelle has no muscle. It has it's all tendon. And I'm like, okay, this is making sense. But one thing I did notice, like when I'm looking through things even further, I noticed like, well, tigers can jump really high, and gazelles can jump really high, but they have different anatomical structures. And I also noticed when I was looking at this one documentary, this tiger had one leg stronger than the other. One of its front legs had more hypertrophy, more musculature than the other. And I'm like, oh, these kind of asymmetrical imbalances, like this is kind of just a part of biology. Like you're going to see this like in every kind of animal, including us. So like did you ever kind of like take these journeys or make these observations to try to figure out like like where this all comes from? Because some people are like, oh my god, like I have this imbalance, and like and they like hit their head against the wall, like I don't know why my body's the way it is. And a lot of times I tell them like, dude, you could be born this way. Like some of this could be genetic, right? And you have to re-stimulate your body and reactivate, I think, like the epigenetics to try to correct what's going on with your biology. You know, like what do you think about that kind of like thought experiment? Do you ever kind of dive down those rabbit holes for yourself to come to these to land where you landed?
No, absolutely. At one point, I was super into this, primarily because my specialty is on why girls tear their ACLs more than boys, right? So at the end of the day, fundamentally, whether we want to get into it or not or whatever, boys and girls are different, right? And
Oh yeah.
that X and Y chromosome, right? As you boil a human existence down, literally down to the basics, everything about our genotype, right, that expresses our phenotype, right, starts with X and Y, right? And so that's the fundamental split when you look at the human species, right? And
Hmm.
not all organisms have a sex, right?
Right.
And so there's differences in those sexual characteristics. So I got super into this studying the uh, anthropology, and actually at one point I thought about trying to go back and getting a PhD in anthropology. I thought it was such a cool subject of going back because it also relates to economics, and economics is trying to be this kind of resourceful human to get our needs in a scarce environment, which again, my Christian background, which goes back to the Bible, the Genesis 3, God says, hey, sorry, I'm going to make you live in this scarce environment. Good luck. You just had an abundance. Now you're basically being put into this environment now where you're going to have to farm the land and all this stuff, right? And so that tiger, I'll come back to that. Interesting thing, maybe it had an injury,
Really.
right? And so one of the things we don't do a lot with wild animals, particularly, is rehab them, right, and to build them back up. Yet they seem to figure out a way to survive, which is the most amazing thing. Also, that's what they do, right? They survive. And now this is the part, really for even especially in American culture, we've really lost our sense of human. I always joke about, you have to better have a better sense of human. I'll say I have a better sense of human because I'm so in love with this stuff. I just love everything there is about humans, right? And so, but when you go back to like again, like the sexes and whatnot, what drives most of human existence is survival and replication, right? And so at the fundamental level, well, once your survival needs are met and you're not really having a problem with mate selection and replication, right? Things start getting a little goofy. You start doing things like playing sports because you got
Hmm.
to have something to do with your energy and your time,
Right.
right? But at the same time, that evolves off of, well, how do we create a social hierarchy, right? Because that's who we are as human beings, right? We live in these communities, which is what one of the things that makes us different. So our actions lead us to be rewarded in the social hierarchy. Well, mastery, right, is something that used to be mandatory for you to meet your way or make your way up the social hierarchy, right?
Oh.
Whether it was just survival, right, in your ability to build a fire or whatever. So these hardwired neurobiological patterns are there to reward us to be able to do the right thing. Now, this is, I think we might have talked about this last time. Habits and skills kind of wire the same way, but they actually wire on different circuits, right? And so a lot of times we are unaware of the habits that we're developing, and they're actually hurting our intentional skill development. Or again, which I talk about in the book as a weak angle, we think that we're developing skills, but we're actually focused on habits and we don't have them clearly defined. Habits are potentially unintentional, and they're much more stimulus and response, right? But skill always requires intention, and it requires more of your cerebellar process of going, did I get it right or didn't I?
Hmm.
Right. And so this is actually one of the neat things, that your cerebellum doesn't just work on motor control, it's also working on skill development in anything that you're doing, right? Because it's giving you this guide on timing and sequencing, and also, did I get it right? Did the ball go in the hoop? Did the kick land where I wanted it to land?
Hmm.
Right? And so the faster and better that you could acquire the skills and develop mastery, the higher you could work up your social hierarchy, which also increases testosterone. And there's all these things, right? So we are hardwired, right, to seek climbing the social hierarchy. And if you even look at sports now, right, why do we play the sports that we play? Why are the biggest sports that even MMA, right? 30 years ago, it wasn't glorified like it is now. It was actually looked at completely the opposite. Like, why would you ever do that? Right? As soon as you can start making $1 million paychecks, everybody's like, hold on, this is
It's
pretty
cool
cool.
now.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's try this, right? Type of scenario, right? So we are very incentive driven organisms, right? And well, why are we doing that? Again, mate selection and these and survival, right? It's easier for me to protect myself in this world, right? If I have an abundance of money, if I have an abundance of money, I can get a better mate, especially as a man, right? And so, and you know, there's a saying that Beyonce could work at McDonald's and get Jay-Z, but Jay-Z couldn't work at McDonald's and get Beyonce, right?
Yep.
And so with that, again, still we're all biologically wired, right, in ways that improve our efficiency, and particularly one of the biggest efficiencies is our movement economy, right? Our body gets better at patterning in our movements so we can basically do our daily functions of whatever they are with less energy output, right? And so your nervous system is constantly going, okay, well, how can we be more efficient at this? How can we be more efficient at this? Like we talked about last time about irradiation, right? Where I contract one muscle and it irradiates into other muscle groups. Well, again, if I'm in the weak angle, that may create a compensation that is going to, you know, that's going to drive into my nervous system versus if I'm in the strong angle, now I'm wiring in this muscle firing pattern that's going to connect the correct muscle groups.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I know I may be deviating a little bit. Are you still following?
Yeah, yeah. Because what I have in my head that I've been wanting to ask you is, okay, so let's create like a an example of this for like some of the listeners, right? Because this is very like we're really hitting the edge of like what the human brain can understand and what actually is happening in reality, right? Which is always a fun play. It's always fun to be in that chaos. Let's say I've been really studying the extreme ISO method lately, right? It's been a really fascinating philosophy of pushing modalities, and it was developed by Jay Schroeder. Have you ever talked to Jay? Do you know him at all?
I have never talked to Jay, no, and I'm not sure where his whole beginnings comes from either. But my guess is because he was with the Raiders, right?
I don't know. I haven't looked
You have to
into his.
look that up. I think he was with the Raiders, and that's where Marv was. That was the connection I made years back when I came across Jay's stuff because it was so similar to Marv's,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And Adam
Okay,
Archuleta and that whole story. But
okay.
I don't know anybody that's directly connected to it. Like I know you had that guy that was on recently that was very familiar with that.
Yeah,
But
Ivan.
I'm familiar with it, but just not them specifically in general. No personal connections that I know of.
Okay. So Jay implemented this, well, reintroduced this modality type it's been around for like 1,000 years, like especially in Asia. You know, extreme isometric holds done at a very high length and flexion of the limbs, right? One that's really popular right now is the lunge extreme iso, and his philosophy is that his philosophy is that you want to push these extreme isos technically in the weakest of the weak angles they can handle for as long as possible to force the nervous system to burn through its energy cycles, right? To go all the way through from aerobic to anaerobic, you know, and the goal is to reach 5 minutes. And when I was kind of studying this idea, and I was even trying to run it through some AI to fully understand this, that apparently this is supposed to help the nervous system get some of these compensators and stabilizers to be reincorporated, you know, into holding strength into the body, right? But it sounds like that philosophy might be contradicting your weak angle philosophy, or maybe there's like a gray in there that you can kind of like explain to me a little bit better. Do you kind of see where I'm going with this?
No, absolutely. And so the first thing that I always come back to is that when this is what I've been learning, because I've been all into all this stuff since the beginning, just like you, and so again, if you're not really recognizing the strong angle, then we do a lot of weird things to try to get a lot of results that the strong angle could be getting you. that you're looking for to get in other ways that are less efficient.
Mm,
Doesn't
okay.
mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're wrong. They're just
Right.
less efficient in getting you the results that you're looking for, which typically risks overtraining,
Right.
right? And so that's one of our biggest problems. And I always identify overtraining as just doing more than you need to do. Right now, the question is that's not very clearly defined on what it is, right? Type of scenario, and every case is a little different, right? But the idea is let's use leverage to get more with less,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More
Good return on
gain.
investment.
Exactly right. Think like an investor. That's my rule number four. It's funny. I have these rules with my son. We'll have to talk about them at
Yeah.
some point. But yeah, think like an investor, right? Delay gratification for the long term, right? Type of scenario. So then the other part of it is that we have in the strong angle, we think about aligning your phase, right, and your function with your future. And so basically, those three things, if they connect, you're in the strong angle. And where we usually get screwed up is in the phase part. Function's usually not very good either because we're not doing a good job of assessing function, coming back to entropy and syntropy and how do we measure it and that type of stuff. But we forget that there's phases, right? And so sometimes a heavy isometric dose like that can be done in phases where it works really, really well, depending on what you've assessed, depending on what the problem is, depending on what your goal is in that type of scenario, right? But then the question is there maybe a better way to do it? Isometrics generally work because you're seeing a huge amount of muscle recruitment without changing range of motion. And so you see irradiation effects that bleed over anywhere from basically 15 to 30 degrees in the range of motion as well, right? So even if you're doing like an open chain knee extension motion, for example, one of the reasons we'll use it in physical therapy, we call them multi-angle isometrics. Like I think that you're familiar with, like on the supercat, you do the three different positions and you're
Right.
holding, right? Type of scenario. And so three-way holds became that because the irradiation effects on the nervous system, they bleed over into these ranges of motion, but not completely, right? And so you have to keep working through the ranges of motion to allow that to happen. Now, in a functional movement like a lunge, if you think about one of the things that you're doing, and it kind of goes back to the rate coding Henneman's principle of using smaller motor units and going and getting bigger motor units to recruit. So kind of like what you were talking about, what also happens is more muscle groups have to recruit. And so what's happening is number one, you're working on your balance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can you stay balanced, right? Well, what does balance mean? Balance means that I can keep my equilibrium dynamically in this position and hold it and move back and forth. Well, the longer that I try to balance, the more muscle groups I have to pull in to recruit to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
that, right? One being your core, right? So your core now starts to really actually start to recruit to keep you in position because now your quads and the bigger muscle groups are starting to have a harder time working by themselves just to keep you in that position, especially if you have quad dominance or something along those lines where you have a tendency to use those muscles in the initial phases. Now you're being pushed into a different level of connection, right,
Yeah.
with your body, that right, to go, okay, I'm in this alignment, right? Initially I'm connecting this way. Well, now the longer that I hold, my nervous system starts going, we got to connect more things.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. Now where I go is how do you take that really, really long range of motion that you're doing and now maybe depending on how you're looking about it, it could be an inefficient way of trying to move you into the coordination phase. Because if you're in a position where you can't move and you can't switch directions, all you've done is condition yourself to be in a position where you can't move and switch directions. So the next phase would be to go to static dynamic, right? So if I can go basically static hold and then dynamically move out of that position, now I can condition that position to be actually useful for me when it comes to coordination. But if all I do is hold it, I actually am going to dampen my stretch reflex,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is also where we transfer over. Most of these systems are doing some level of plyometrics and whatnot behind that, right? So you're still working those stretch reflexes in those positions, even with the like the kickovers and all that type of stuff. You're arguably still working that. Versus what I would do is go to static dynamic next in the next phase, or even maybe simultaneously in like a triphasic French contrast type of model as well to go, okay, we worked on this heavy isometric, right? We're holding this position, but you're basically frozen, right? How do we create the ability to switch directions? Because to me, that's more important. And now, what I would ask is fundamentally, why are you doing the max isometrics in the first place?
Right. What's the goal? Yes, that's yeah. So the goal is to see how much of a physical therapy effect I can have on my body and try to get this glute medius to kick in and stabilize my pelvis so my glute minimus isn't being overactive and constantly agitated. That's like the primary goal. So I'm keeping it very controlled with just this one modality to address it. And so far, I've reached the end of my experiment. I just, yeah, and it's like a weird, just a fun little experiment that I want that I post about on social media. Just 14 sessions, see how far I can get, what type of results. And so far, I've experienced about a 50% reduction on agitation in that whole localized area. But it seems to be a plateaued there. And I feel like I have to try, maybe I have to hit more strong angles now to kind of really, yeah, okay, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it, doctor.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because you can't fix a strong angle problem in a weak angle,
Angle, but yeah, okay.
right? Right, exactly. And so ultimately, if all you did was weak angles, but it's just not functionally how we move, that might work. But functionally, we move in strong angles, right? So the strongest angle is just standing straight up, right? That's where we're the most efficient because we
Right.
walk in that position. That's why we can, especially as humans, we can walk for so long,
Ever.
but we can tolerate a lot of gravity, even in a squat, right? You can put 500 pounds on your back and stand there, but you can't break that position and try to squat down. You're going to collapse, right? Type of
Mhm.
thing. In I don't even know, your average weightlifter type of scenario, right? But at that top range, that standing position, you have the most tolerance to load, right? And so again, what partially happens is your body's being physiologically stressed for adaptation, not optimization,
Right.
right? In the strong angle, you optimize, right? In the weak angle, you're getting physiological stress for adaptation that's general,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Which isn't wrong or bad. It's again, it's how you use it. So now you're starting to get some probably good recruitment and blood flow and things like into the areas that maybe weren't getting it before. Even just, I mean, I would argue with you if you did long holds in the strong angle, you would get real similar benefits.
I
Right?
know.
Just stand on one leg for as long as you possibly could.
Yeah.
Right?
I, I
You know
was.
what I mean?
Yeah. I was starting to play around with that thought process as I was going through this like sort of little fun experiment for myself. I was also playing around after I got my 14 sessions. I was playing around with like just different lunge positions, different angles, and actually, okay, I'll say this. So I switched it up and I started to, I can't remember the name. There's so many freaking modalities. It's my brain. I was doing that lunge, but I was bringing my leg that goes into hip extension. I was bringing it behind my pelvis, kind of like a skater lunge. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what the name of the type of modality
Yeah,
is.
sure.
And right, so I was trying to change the leverage more into my lateral hip. And I noticed when I was doing that, I can't get as low into flexion anymore, right? So I'm more into what you would call the strong angle. And I noticed the strong angle, it was like yeah, I could hold it way longer. And after I was done, I noticed a much better relief out of the hip. Now, one, I'm pushing leverage more into the area that I want it. I'm making more demand out of that lateral hip, but also, hitting that stronger angle, I was able to concentrate on it better. I was able to hold it longer. It was less stressful on my body and on my mind, and I'm getting a better result. So it all comes down to, and this is a big important philosophy that I always hammer this home for a lot of trainers, is that it's always about goal, return on investment, and efficiency. Because the reality is, when you're working with an athlete, you don't have a perfect timeline, right? You got to get the best out of them with what they can afford a lot of the times and what time that you have. So It's not like this modality is good and this modality is bad. It's like, what's the goal? Can doing it this way get me an efficient return on investment? Doing it this way can get me like, it's all about what you want to get out of it based on the timeline. And this is where a lot of trainers, especially on the social media space, I get attacked constantly for this, where everyone is saying like, this is not the way you do it. You have to do it this way. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
everything works. Like it's all eustress at the end of the day. But maybe some things are going to work faster and more efficient than others, depending on what the goal is, right?
And we've talked this a little bit, and so I'll agree with that almost 100% to a certain point, to where typically what's happening for me is somebody like you that has a background, like you're my ideal client, right? That I typically see with what I do for fixing people, right? Type of scenario, right? And so you've been trying all these things, you've been doing all of these things, and yet your hip keeps getting worse, right? And then you come in and I just do these assessments that are different. I'm focused on the strong angle, blah, 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 right? And I reveal a few things to you, and you're like, oh, nobody's ever showed that to me before, right? And so what happens is when we're missing this part with the strong angle, you keep grinding in a grind that's not actually getting you to the point where you want to be. And we also have this like acceptance mentally where we're like, well, maybe it's never going to get better, right?
Right.
I knew Jimmy with the bad hip, and Steve that had the trick knee, and Bob that had the bad back, and maybe that's just a part of getting older, right? Type of scenario. And one of the biggest things is this: the strong angle is not just a range of motion; it's connecting, right? So when we have an injury or a pain problem, it's like almost like the body wants to disconnect. It's like if my shoulder is injured, my shoulder just like wants to drop off my body, right? Or if when I limp, it's like literally my leg is like dragging, like my body does not want to use it. And what happens is if you think about plyometrics, it's all about actually the force absorption phase, right, which dictates how much force you can create. Well, it's the same thing in walking and every movement, right? If I go to move my arm, right, is my shoulder going to retract, like or in a punch, right? Is my shoulder going to retract, or for some reason is it going to lock up and brace? Right now, I can't use the elasticity in my core to rotate and throw this punch. The same thing happens when you go to put your foot on the floor. Reflexively, right, your body knows that you're too weak or too injured or whatever it is, and it won't let you load, so it pulls your foot off, right? And that's literally what happens when you're limping, right? You're pulling
Yeah,
your body
exactly.
away from the loading pattern, right? So, in a lot of times, what happens is, and what's going on in this isometric pattern, which I would say is too aggressive for somebody that has a pathology like you're developing right now, you want to go back to the strong angle in a position where you can make sure that you're loading with confidence. Where you know that you're loading with confidence is when you feel like you can switch directions.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I'll teach you my two little tricks for this is for you, right? So number one, look at your head position when you have each leg alignment, right? Right versus left being in the front. A lot of times your head's tipped off to the side or it's forward or backward on one side versus the other, right? And you got to figure out where your alignment is. It's like shooting a double leg or a penetration step on a shot, right? It matters where my head is. If I put my head down like this, it changes the angle of how much power I have with my legs,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
So a
hmm.
lot of times when we go to do lunges, our upper body is moving, right? Which also changes the position of our scapula. And so when we have a hip problem, usually the scapula are being affected as well, but you don't think about it when you're going into your lunge. You might think about it in your punching patterns or your running patterns, right? But when you're going into your lunge, that one scapula might be retracting or protracting or depressing, and that also is connecting to that hip issue,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So then the next part is when you're in the lunge position, this is what I teach people. You should be able to pick up both of your feet, right? So if
Okay.
I'm in the strong angle, right, I shouldn't be so loaded onto one foot that I can't lift it.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense? Because now
Yeah.
I have equal weight on both feet. And a lot of times we neglect the back foot, particularly in a lunge where you're, in that big toe flexion position. And a lot of people just have poor balance in that scenario and they have no power. And again, this comes back to wrestling, right? Like you've
Yeah.
got to be able to push off of that back foot, especially without back stepping. And so we know everybody's got a side dominant pattern, right-handed or left-handed. They have a leg that they like to shoot off of or push off of, or even when they're walking, you can watch people, right? One arm's doing all the swinging motion, right? And so this scapula is now locking down, and it's not allowing that left hip to work, or it could be the right hip, depending on what's going on, right? So those are those three things, right? Look at your head position, look at your shoulder position, and especially the fluidity and you being able to move your scapula while you're in those lunge positions, right? Also, if you can't do that, that means that you're in a position where you're stuck,
Yeah.
right? You should be able to feel like you can move. You should be able to throw punches. If you're really in a good position, you should be able to move your upper body wherever you want it because you have balance. That's what real balance is,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
right? I should feel like I can move and do whatever I want to do with my body, right? And then again, can you pick up both feet? So that's how you would actually know. That's where I would stop you if I was working on like a regression progression of a lunge exercise like that. I would want to see where it is that you have enough balance to pick up both feet. And I would stop you there and say, hold that position.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Wow, I really needed this book. Holy shit. Man, okay, I'm literally okay, so I'm literally stuck in the weak angle. I can actually see all these different methods that I'm trying and I'm reviewing all cuz I'll tell you what, I don't know if you struggle with this, but coaching yourself is freaking impossible. I cannot do it very well. Are you able to do that very well? I suck at it.
I've only gotten better at it because of what you're talking about. And I didn't have a central concept. Once I started getting the central concept, it made it easier. And I think some of it came to me running my business as well, where I got so independent that I didn't have anybody, nobody was coming to save me,
Right.
right? Type of scenario, right? And so I got real into creating like kind of standard operating procedures. And the way that my training, I was going to say something about this earlier and I lost my train of thought, but this one guy that I did a bunch of training with early on in my career, um, and I'm still lost for it, but one of the things that I really got into is what I call an evaluation or a results-based protocol, right? Your evaluation should take you to the results that you're trying to look to, right? And so, again, coming back to science and being scientific, we like to think that we're being that way a lot of the times, but we're actually not using the scientific method on ourselves sometimes as well as we could, or we're just limited by the assessments that we're using, right? And
Mhm.
so early on in my career, even with Marv's system, right? Like Marv, they had a big assessment component to it, right? And most of it's actually physical therapy tests,
Yeah.
right? Right. And so, for me, that was why it resonated. But also, there's a ton of other physical therapy tests that I learned that if you're not a physical therapist, you're not going to learn them. Even if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you're not going to learn them. Right. Type of scenario. Right. We learn a specifically unique body of knowledge that starts with assessments because if I'm the doctor, right, of what I do, right, it's not the modality like we're talking about. Right. And this is people get stuck on modalities versus paying attention to principles, like you were
Mhm.
saying, right? And part of the principles are also aligned with the assessments. But why do we do these assessments? Well, based on the principles, right? And so the assessments that connect to the principles. Well, it's really the evaluation of the data because anybody can still understand the principles and also do assessments, right? We can teach people how to do that. The hard part is the evaluation of the data, which is what you're talking about, right? How do I take the data that I'm getting in self assess, right? And so that's also what part of this book is about, right? Because all you got to do is come back to the present moment and go, am I in the strong angle or the weak angle,
Yeah.
right? The reason why it's so powerful because there's very few things, if you look at skill acquisition, you want something that's going to allow you to self assess, right? And basically give you the awareness that you need of what's going on, the data, and immediately self correct,
Mhm.
right? There's very few things that work like that, but that's also the reason why we love the gamification of sports. Again, if I throw a punch, did I hit where I wanted it to? If I throw a kick, did it hit where I wanted it to? Right? If I shoot a basket or basketball, does it go in the hoop or doesn't it? Right? Immediate feedback. right? Which allows me to keep going, oh, I need to move my body this way, or I need to adjust my angle on this kick, or whatever it is, right? But the problem is when we get away from sports and we get away from games, we don't really have a great way of assessing our current state of our lives, right? And so having that ability to go, am I in the strong angle right now? Right? Even when we're in a fitness routine, like on one end we know it sometimes, right? We're like, this sucks. I don't like this. This doesn't feel good, right? But we've been taught to have this kind of sadist mindset where we're like, well, if it hurts, it must be good for me,
Yeah,
type of
right,
thing,
right.
right? And sometimes that is the need, right? Is to push through some discomfort. But the question is that the goal at the time?
Right.
Right? And should be that be the goal at the time. Again, are you in the strong angle or the weak angle? So my goal really of the book, and the reason why I came out with it before I finished the physical book, which is what I'm working on right now, the one that you're going to love, absolutely, because it has all the answers to this stuff in it, was that we're just going through a time coming back to this state of the world and economics and us losing our sense of humor or human, right? And losing our kind of our why and how we function and understanding that mastery is so important. Well, you just keep hearing all these stories about how people feel like they're not empowered to do anything. Everybody's hopeless, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is we're getting so much information overload and methods and modalities without a unifying principle to keep us mentally centered, right? And as the strong angle became that, it was like, oh wow, this is everything keeps relating back to this. I was like, is this a universal principle that we've been missing? Like this idea of alignment. Like if you don't start in alignment, you're starting in a misalignment. So everything that you do is going to be inefficient from there. Well, if everything's inefficient, does that mean that we're all overdoing it? Well, yeah, look at it. We all live like we're grinding, grind, and you hear did you get to the David Goggins and Tim Grover section yet? The
I,
Relentless.
yeah, I got into a section on David Goggins where he pushes the grind, but he doesn't always push like optimization. You touched on it briefly.
Exactly, right? And that's the whole thing, right? It's a side dominance of going, I'm going to be the toughest dude in the world, right? And you just end up so imbalanced. And people can choose to live how they want with their lives,
Right.
right? But does everybody want to be David Goggins, right? You want to live in that mindset, right? And most people do not. Like he's an outlier of outliers, right?
Hmm.
Even in Tim Grover's the same way. Michael Jordan's outliers of outliers. Those people are borderline sociopaths, really, right? When it comes down, right? I mean, it's the truth. But that's one of the things that makes him so special in a lot of ways, right? And so what we don't ever think about is, well, how are you going to optimize your grind? And actually, I ended up changing the book because the marketing people told me that people don't resonate with optimize as much. So I changed the subtitle to transform your grind. But I write a ton about optimization in the book, right? How do we optimize things? And the strong angle is an automated type of optimizer. Once you start recognizing it, it automatically starts optimizing everything that you're doing because it's bringing everything back to a central concept.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it's kind of well, it kind of reminds me of religion, to be honest. It creates like a psychological scaffolding to keep you in, like you said, in alignment with what you're trying to do. It kind of has that law of nature effect with your mind and how you conduct yourself, your behavior, and with your body. It's kind of like what I'm sensing out of this philosophy that you're coming up with. Man, I'm freaking sorry. I got a million things racing through my head, and I can't like say it all because I'm just like it's making sense. It is a lot to wrap your head around, even for me. And I'm like Mr. Philosophy, Stone Age, freaking understanding biology kind of guy, and I'm like, okay, okay, okay. I'm barely hanging in there. I just need to sleep on it, and I'm gonna come back stronger with this and come back on that strong angle. Um,
Yeah, and
let me.
I've literally been doing that a little longer than you, right? I'm 10 years older than you, right? And just I figured out this strong angle thing 6, 7 years ago and started paying attention to it and just started. I was thinking about this earlier because a lot of this came because I had the courage to have people tell me that I was stupid when I was trying to figure this out. And I took
Yeah.
a lot of people punching me in the face a little bit and going, because I didn't know what I was talking about at the time, but I wasn't afraid because I had a strong belief that no matter what, if I just kept asking this question and going down this line, that I was going to figure something out. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I recognized that there was something about it that was powerful. And I just kept bringing it up in conversations, but I was fumbling through it so bad, like what you're trying to say, and trying to realize that it's this ultimate connector, right? It took me
Hmm.
years to figure that out, right? But that's why I wrote the book, because the code of understanding it is written in the book. Like I talk about the Rosetta Stone. The idea of the Rosetta Stone was we couldn't crack the Egyptian code or the language, right? And they needed a codex to be able to figure it out. Well, they find this Rosetta Stone that has multiple languages that are written on it. Egyptian is one, and they go, "Oh, now we can decode the hieroglyphics," right? That's what this process has been for me, right? Is decoding this scenario so we can have a kind of a common language of understanding what this is. And
Yeah.
again, it's just something. This strong angle thing's a real thing, right? Like what we're talking about. Like one of the examples is in fitness, to come back to sports performance, right? We've moved to doing more step ups and hex bar deadlifts because we know that when you do those things, it has a more functional transfer to running and jumping. Well, why? You're in a stronger angle, right? It's more like the movements that we're going to do in sport, right? So it
Yeah.
has a better specificity, right? The only thing that I've done is just taken it to the farthest level, the deepest level, right? The deepest of the deep, unlike you, and trying to understand how it really relates to everything. Right. And it was the other way around. I was realizing that it related to everything as I was working through all of this stuff.
Man, I feel like I'm on acid right now. Like just trying to like all these stuff, like, because I'm thinking, because I'm going on like, man, is this like a universal law? Is this like it works because it falls under like, well, it's the only way biology can function under gravity properly. There are certain things that have to take place just because of the laws of the cosmos, and this feel like this philosophy is trying to open up one of these ideas about our own biology and the reality of our own existence, and try to, like you said, try to create a Rosetta Stone, try to recode it so everyone can understand what's going on. Because that's really, not a lot of people understand this, but that's really what the purpose of the human race is about. When you really like narrow it down, it's all about trying to understand what reality is. That's why we're obsessed with truth as a species. That's a universal law since the beginning of time. Every culture, every language, truth is the one thing that we're obsessed with. And I don't even know where I'm
So in
going with this sentence, but are you
strong
kind of
angle
vibing
thing.
with what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What I was getting ready to say is the ones that really make impact on us are contrarian truths. And so there's a quote in the book by Machiavelli that basically says something like, "There's nothing more dangerous in the world to create a new order of things." Right? And basically, anytime that you're trying to create something new, culture hangs on to the devil that it knows, and basically, you're going to have a lot of adversity that by the people that are potentially going to lose from the new order, right? But the supporters of the new thing have lukewarm faith because they don't really have anything to lose or gain too much, right? It's not like they're in power, even though they're the ones that it's actually going to benefit the most, right? So coming back to you, you're right? It's like anytime again that a new concept comes up like this in a contrarian truth, right? It's partially hard to get your head wrapped around because you've had path dependency. We talked about this, I think, last time, right? About what's already gotten you to where you're at. So again, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the American College of Sports Medicine, right? Marv, everybody that you've ever learned from before was learning from a paradigm of where the measurements could only measure certain things. I'll just go to that, right? And so we didn't have all the best tools for measurement that we even have today, right? And so there always ends up being a bias along those ways. And though they're answering the truth, we don't always get to the ultimate truth, right? Which again is it's been hard for me in a lot of ways because I'm going, why coming back to religion and spirituality and things like this? why did God bless me with this strong angle understanding? And even like coming back to Mike's been, talking to me about this, about how unique it's been for me to be able to break this down and explain it to him, right? Like which is like a hugely flattering, like humility type of thing for me. At the same time, I feel like this is what God's wanted me to do, is to get this out there, right? Again, you just keep hearing so many people struggling in life, right? In
Hmm.
today's world, we have so much abundance. We have so much to be grateful for, right? This is one of the things I talk about in the book. Well, how do we use gratitude functionally, right? Because most people, what they do is basically they do a gratitude journal and they talk the talk, but when it comes back to the moment that they need to focus on their gratitude, it's not there,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The only thing they're thinking about is what they don't have,
Hmm.
right? And basically, when you have unchecked ambition, right, that basically doesn't allow you to connect through your gratitude, it's greed.
Right.
Does that make sense? Right.
Yeah.
And so it creates a mental imbalance because all you're doing is thinking about what you don't have. Right. So literally, you're putting yourself in the weak angle all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make
Oh,
sense?
yes. Yes. Jesus. How did you like? It's really a miracle you're able to put this to words.
That's what
Like
I'm saying.
honestly, like it's. I'm sure there's been plenty of nights you're just staring at the wall, like, how do I explain what I'm feeling? That's one of my biggest struggles. Like, and that's a big struggle for a lot of us is how do we create what we can feel into a language for everyone to understand? Man, so we're almost running out of time, but let's close on gratitude because and man, I'm glad we were able to make these podcasts happen. This is just the beginning, folks. Go ahead, Neil. What do you got to say?
I know you wanted to talk about Marv and the guys from the system in the past. You want to save that for another one? I know we're
Yeah,
running
we're gonna
out of.
say that for another one. This is gonna be quite the journey me and you are going down. I can like feel something like and I knew I'll be totally honest, Doctor. I've been trying to find you for years. I've been seeing you pop up in like little bits of footage and YouTube videos. I'm like, there's that guy. There's the dude with the black hair. He's like that big, like he's like kind of like a thick guy. I see him like in all the SSL videos working with Rhonda. All these things, and there's always something about how you kind of explain things that always kind of like it just clicks, and it's just really really amazing that you've been able to pull this off, and I'm so glad that we were able to have these conversations, like practicing my gratitude and to take a little side note, just to kind of like expand upon like a random thought that I've had, and maybe you can kind of like, maybe you can kind of like touch on this too before we close out the podcast, is that I'm reevaluating everything in my thought process. What's been in the weak angle, what's been the strong angle. Like I can feel it now. I can feel what you're talking about. And I have struggled with this, scarcity mindset, always thinking about what I don't have, leading to overambition, leading to greed, and trying to self-evaluate, like what is going on. And I've totally disconnected from like mainstream politics right now. Like I keep hearing about all these things going on in the world, and I'm just like not in it anymore. I'm just taking a step back for like, and it's been like 2 weeks, and I've just been going deep, deep into history. In particular, I've been diving really deep into World War II, just obsessively with it. And I saw this new mini series that's just been blowing me away. It's called Masters of the Air or Masters of the Sky. Have you heard of it?
No, tell me more.
Oh, it's so good. It's everyone got to watch it. It's on Apple TV, Apple Plus, and it's by the same production team that did Band of Brothers. They did The Pacific. They did Saving Private Ryan. That's like just phenomenal job. And they go over the story of the 100th Air Bomber Division in the European theater. And I'm learning about this. I'm watching episodes. I'm also having conversations with my AI. It's teaching it back to me. And some of the fates of some of these men that had to go through this World War experience, I just couldn't even imagine how they did it. Like we're talking, like just as an example, that this 100th Bomber Division started before they started operations. started with 350 airmen, pilots, and crew. 350. And this is just one division, right? It's a lot of men. After like 4 months, they were down to 10. They're down to 10 men. And like when you see these operations go by, like they're flying in these B-17 flying fortresses that are made out of fucking aluminum, right? Flying over Europe, getting hit with flak rounds that are basically explosive grenades in the air. They're getting shot by 20 millimeter cannons by the Luftwaffe, by Ju-88 airplanes, right? And some of these airplanes, it would hold 10 men in a plane, right? 10 guys, unpressurized. So they're in altitudes up that are as high as Mount Everest. So they all have oxygen deprivation, right? They're freezing. Like some of these guys, like they can't salivate or it'll freeze to their skin. And in just one swoop by the enemy airplane could kill all 10 men instantaneously. There's this one incident in 60 seconds, they lost 40 men, four bombers, all got taken out by eight different fighters. And the point I'm trying to make, the picture I'm trying to paint, is the unimaginable suffering and the unimaginable odds that some people have to go through. And I'll tell you what, I have thought about how grateful I am for the life that I have and how stupid my problems actually are. And how much less anxiety and stress and agitation I have in my day to day. And now that I'm just disconnected from this constant flow of information that the world provides right now with the news and in things that in the government and incidences in the public, like, right? And I just focus on how bad things can really get. And I've just developed so much gratitude for my life. And I'm like, you know what? Life is good. Life is really good. Like it can get so much worse. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to touch on that because it really, when you said gratitude and the strong angle, just really triggered that thought process for me. I just wanted to share
Absolutely.
that.
Well, it's great, and I think that this is the conundrum that we're living in because the world still isn't easy, but it's probably the best, like a way to say it, platform for humans to ever exist on, right? But we're dealing with new things that we've never had to deal with before, and it's probably in some way, shape, or form a little easier to deal with when it's kind of simple, like I was just talking about survival and replication, right? Where those bomber guys, and I'll come back to the thing that the two things, right, that you made me think of is gratitude with what you were just talking about, but honor is the other one,
Mm,
right? Why would you go do something like that, right?
right.
Honor, right?
Hmm.
And maybe the third thing is alignment, right? In your own self-image and going, this is who I am, this is what I was made to do, right? There's no questioning. Right now, we have a big, even in military, we have a big problem with that. Guys get into it and they don't want to go off and risk their lives and kill other people and things like that, right? And so people come home with more PTSD problems and things like that. And it was probably a misalignment from the beginning, right? And again, you could go deep on this, like, but our culture is just not facilitating that anymore, right? Even,
Right.
you think about the baby boomers and the first round of kids that came out of that, right? Then the next thing you know, we're saying, hey, you know what? Go to Vietnam, right? You just had a silver spoon in your mouth for the first time ever in human history, right? People were living the most comfortable lives through the 50s and 60s in the United States that had ever existed before. And then we took that first round of babies and sent them off to Vietnam, right? What did that do to our culture, right?
Right.
These guys came back a mess, right? And so, it's changed like that, right? But honor is another form of strong angle leverage that I talk about in the book, right? Who are you when nobody's looking, right? It's one of the most powerful forms of leverage, again, that gives you more results with less effort just because you're in the right alignment,
Yeah.
right? And so a lot of times we're so focused on coaching plyometrics and all of these other things, but people are still misaligned, right? So when you hear the greatest of the greats, you never hear them talk about that,
Right.
right? They're so locked in. They honor their sport. They even like wrestling's the best one, and that's why I'm a little biased, right? You hear the guys at the NCAA tournament every time they honor the sport. That's why they do it, right? Is because there's just this tradition of honor. Like we participate in this thing because we're honoring the people that have come before us. We're honoring the nature and the grind of the sport and everything that comes through that. And that's what gets you to run those extra laps and think like an investor, right? Whenever you're facing a challenging situation or you just don't feel like doing it, right? Honor says, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to stay in alignment, right? And most of the
Right.
time, you don't. If you really have honor to that level, you don't even think about
Yeah. Well, doctor, it's been another freaking banger episode.
it. Hey, yeah, this is
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, man. We got it. We got to. Don't worry, folks. This is the first of many. This is. I feel the mission. I feel the mission. You can feel it right now. You feel it. I can feel like
Yep.
this is gonna get out. We're gonna make some. We're gonna help a lot of people with this. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna help a lot of people with this message, and we're gonna get this out there. Do you have anything you kind of want to close on before we end the episode?
No, man. I mean, just like what you just said, I think this has kind of been a long time coming. I think we talked about this a little bit offline a couple weeks ago that we both bring this passion for this and have kind of different backgrounds on it, or however you want to say it. I think us working together on this is going to be really fun and impactful, which is both what we're looking to do, right? Is to not just make points, right, but is to make an impact. And so I'm excited about that.
That's the
It's been a long
mission.
time.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. All right. Well, folks, like, comment, and subscribe. If you got any questions on the strong angle, drop them in the comments. I will read them. We'll bring them up on the next episode. Dr. Lyneil, where can they get your book?
Yeah, it's on Amazon right now, right? And so basically, just go to Amazon, search for the Strong Angle Way, right? Transform your grind and get dialed in, right? And so
Mhm.
it's easy to find, and there's an ebook version and a paperback version as well. So I appreciate the support, right? I self-published, and it requires support from everybody to get this thing working and get this message out there, right? And I think naturally it's going to catch on as people start understanding, like reading the book, like you are. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to hear the feedback. So if anybody picks it up, hit me up on social media. It's Dr. Lyneil on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel at The Strong Angle, and also thestrongangle.com. So hopefully I'll be easy to find, and I would love to get your feedback and hear from you. I'd love to hear, if you get comments in the any feedback in the comments section, let me know, or we can talk about it next time, right? So
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And we will catch you guys on the next episode of the Nervous System Training Podcast.
sweet.